In my ongoing quest to expose the academics and other so-called experts who specialize in the field of Muslim-Christian history and interaction, such as John Esposito and Karen Armstrong, let's take a quick look at the 2018 book Crusade and Jihad, the Thousand-Year War Between the Muslim World and the Global North by William R. Polk. As we shall see, it encapsulates all the misrepresentations and errors of history that have caused the West to become utterly clueless concerning the roots of its conflict with Islam, which in turn leaves it utterly handicapped in formulating a response to current Islamic threats. For starters, the book's title and ambitious subtitle present it as a comprehensive history. The jacket cover claims that Crusade and Jihad is the first book to encompass in one volume the entire history of the catastrophic encounter between the global North and Muslim societies. William Polk draws on more than half a century of experience as a historian to explain the deep hostilities between the Muslim world and the global North and show how they grew over the centuries. Rather bizarrely, however, the first 1,000 years of history in this book are allotted a paltry 30 pages. Even though the book is 550 pages long, it's quite the tome. In other words, a mere 5% of the book deals with 10 centuries of conflict between the 8th and 18th centuries. What could possibly explain this lopsided approach? After all, that initial millennium contains all the seeds of conflict. As historian Franco Cardini wrote in his 1999 book, Europe and Islam, quote, "If we ask ourselves how and when the modern notion of Europe and the European identity was born, we realize the extent to which Islam was a factor, albeit a negative one, in its creation. Repeated Muslim aggression against Europe between the 7th and 8th centuries, then between the 14th and the 18th centuries, was a violent midwife to Europe." While these violent midwives are known today amongst historians as Arabs, Moors, Turks, Berbers, and Tatars, their invasions and subsequent atrocities were all conducted under the same jihadist logic used by contemporary groups such as ISIS, the Islamic State. As infidels or kuffar, Christian Europeans were free game for rape, enslavement, and slaughter. As Bernard Lewis said in his 1993 book, Islam and the West, quote, "We tend nowadays to forget that for approximately 1,000 years from the advent of Islam in the 7th century until the Second Siege of Vienna in 1683, Christian Europe was under constant threat from Islam, the double threat of conquest and conversion. Most of the new Muslim domains were wrested from Christendom. Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa were all Christian nations, no less, indeed rather more, than Spain and Sicily. All this left a deep sense of loss and a deep fear." Not only are these formative centuries ignored in Polk's book, these 10 centuries essentially, but what he does present is often distorted in Islam's favor. Again, as his book's succinct description explains, Polk shows how Islam arose and spread, it didn't conquer, across North Africa into Europe, climaxed in the vibrant and sophisticated caliphate of Al-Andalus in medieval Spain, and was the bright light in a European dark age. After effusively praising Islamic Spain in his book, Polk writes rather disdainfully that the contrast between Spain and the rest of Europe was stunning. Few in Europe could read, and those few were holed up in monasteries. It is hard to find evidence of more than a few men or women of culture, or even of a degree of social refinement. In Al-Andalus, in contrast, the arts flourished, new forms of poetry were invented, and musical tastes advanced. The problem here is not that these descriptions are false, but that they are presented in a vacuum. Yes, Islamic Spain was very prosperous, but as with all pre-modern Islamic states, its prosperity was built almost entirely on plundering its non-Muslim neighbors of their wealth and their bodies. Cordoba was a slave emporium of European flesh for centuries. In his 1952 book, The History of Spain, Louis Bertrand, a more honest historian, summarized what advanced, sophisticated, and prosperous Al-Andalus was doing to the Christians of the north as follows. To keep the Christians of northern Spain in their place, it did not suffice to surround them with a zone of famine and destruction. It was necessary also to go and sow terror and massacre among them. Twice a year, in spring and autumn, an army sallied forth from Cordoba to go and raid the Christians, destroy their villages, their fortified posts, their monasteries, and their churches. If one bears in mind that this brigandage was almost continual, and that this fury of destruction and extermination was regarded as a work of piety, it was a holy war, jihad, against infidels, it is not surprising that whole regions of Spain should have been made sterile. This was one of the capital causes of the deforestation from which the peninsula still suffers. With what savage satisfaction and in what pious accents do the Arab chroniclers tell us of those raids? A typical phrase for praising the devotion of a caliph is this, quote, "He penetrated into Christian territory where he wrought devastation, devoted himself to pillage and took many prisoners," unquote. The prolonged presence of the Muslims, therefore, was a calamity for this unhappy country of Spain. By their system of continual raids, they kept her for centuries in a condition of brigandage and devastation. Likewise, Polk fails to mention that the stunning illiteracy of Europeans was itself a byproduct of the jihad. After the Muslim conquest of Egypt around 641, papyrus ceased to be imported into Europe, causing illiteracy rates to drop back to pre-Roman levels. Indeed, Christian Europe's dark ages came about largely because Islam destroyed the ancient unity of the Mediterranean, as the eminent archaeologist Henry Perrin demonstrated in his 1937 book, Muhammad and Charlemagne. So there it is, yet another example of the fake history that has long dominated the West's understanding of its history with Islam. Oh, you may be wondering what the rest of Polk's book is all about, the other 95%. It's more of the usual revisionist history, but in reverse. I'll explain in another video down the line. Till then,